Committee will come back to order. We now welcome our second panel. The Honorable Gene Dodaro is Comptroller General of the United States, and we welcome you back. The Honorable David Mader is Comptroller of the Office of Federal Financial Management in the White House Office of Management and Budget. And Mr. David Liebrick is Fiscal Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Treasury, which has been so much talked about as the primary responsible party for the DATA Act. Pursuant to the committee's rules, would you please rise to take the oath and raise your right hand? Just follow Gene. He knows this one. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you very much. Please be seated and let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. The light will indicate your 5 minutes. Please try to stay as close as you can to it. Your entire opening statements will be placed in the record, along with any other extraneous material you may choose to provide. Mr. Dodaro.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about the implementation of the DATA Act. I'd like to start by commending you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cummings, and others, Mr. Connolly and the whole committee, for your vision and persistence in bringing the DATA Act to fruition, and for holding this very important hearing on early implementation phases. As I've testified before this committee before, I think effective implementation of the DATA Act can have profound implications for increasing the transparency of government spending for the public, facilitate better management by agency managers by giving them more accurate and timely information to manage by, and thereby promoting the efficiency and effectiveness of government, and also help facilitate efforts to reduce and hopefully eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse in the Federal Government, and identifying overlapping and duplicative programs that can be identified and remedied. Now, effective implementation, in my opinion and experience, will not happen without strong leadership by OMB, Treasury, and attention by the agencies. And I think our recent report on usaspending.gov really illustrates the challenge here. 5 years after implementation, in 2012 data, on usaspending.gov, we went in and took a look to see about the completeness and accuracy of the information. And we found 324 programs were not recorded in the database. Senator Portman mentioned the number omitted, which is $619 billion of spending was not included. We also checked the 21 data elements that were supposed to be included in the DATA Act and traced them back to their agency records, and only found 2 to 7% of the information tracked back successfully for all the data elements. So we really have to do better with the DATA Act implementation. OMB and Treasury have agreed to implement the recommendations. I've talked to Dave Mader and Dave Liebrick about it, so I'm very pleased about that. But I would say that sustained congressional oversight is also very warranted in this area. For our part at the GAO, I'm giving this a high priority. Our work, the legislation calls for our first report to be in 2017, but you can look for a report from us next year. We're going to track every stage of the implementation over the period of time, not just look at the after-the-fact reports by the IGs. I want to make sure the data standards are complete and consistent. The agencies are poised to implement it successfully. The consultation agreements have worked successfully, and that we're off to a good start in implementing this. Also, I plan to continue to give a high priority to making sure we have complete and accurate reports on the government's financial condition. In my statement today, I've included the results of our last audit of the government's financial statements, in which we were unable to render an opinion because of serious control weaknesses. I mentioned the 3 major impediments to getting an opinion on the statement, which is serious financial management problems at the Department of Defense, and problems at the Treasury Department eliminating intergovernmental transactions and compiling statements. And it includes our opinion on the government's financial condition, which I believe continues to be on a long-term unsustainable fiscal path. I'd be happy to answer questions about the DATA Act implementation and our work on the financial statements at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again for inviting us to participate in this hearing.
Thank you. Mr. Mader.
Thank you, Chairman Eisen and Ranking Member Cummings, excuse me, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify on the administration's progress in implementing the DATA Act, which, as we noted, was signed into law May 9th of this year. This is my first opportunity to appear before the full committee since being confirmed as the OMB Controller on July 17th of this year. While I appear here today in my official capacity as OMB Controller and the OMB official responsible, along with my colleagues from Treasury, to implement the DATA Act, I'm also here as a taxpayer who has always been very interested in how our government spends our tax dollars every year. Since the DATA Act's enactment several months ago, we have charted a very aggressive path towards implementation, building off past experiences and successes to transform the way the government does business. A one-stop shop for the display of all data presents the opportunity not only to have an open, public-facing dialogue on how Federal dollars are spent, but also serves as a tool for better oversight, management decision-making, and innovation both inside and outside of government. Transparency is not the end goal, but rather the means to the end. What we all seek is a better government that works for all of us. The DATA Act envisions a new and enhanced usaspending.gov website that will become the authoritative source for basic information of how agencies budget, obligate, and outlay their funds, and how those dollars are ultimately disseminated through Federal contracts, grants, and other forms of expenditures. But accomplishing this within the aggressive timeframes of the Act will be no small feat, and one that will take several years and additional resources as envisioned by the Act and as scored by CBO. Since the DATA Act's passage in May, OMB and Treasury and the entire Federal community have come together to design what is a government-wide effort. Over the past few months, we have executed several key activities. First, we have established a government-wide governance structure to guide the effort and assign responsibility for various action items and tasks. This includes an executive steering committee as well as an interagency advisory committee and the designation in each department and agency of senior accountable officials who will be responsible for the implementation of their act within their respective organization. This concept worked well for the Recovery Act implementation, and we want to build on past experiences and successes. No time and no need to reinvent the wheel. Second, we have developed an evolving implementation plan that assigns responsibility and accountability and establishes action items and timelines that address each of the major deliverables of the Act. Attached to my written testimony, there is a very concise graphic that depicts the governance structure, the assignment of roles and responsibility, and the structure for the implementation and continuous engagement of stakeholders both inside and outside of government. As we move forward in these first initial months of implementation, we have a clear path forward, accountable executives assigned, and with the Congress's support, appropriate funding, and our mutual interest in improving spending transparency and improving how we manage the government's resources and how the public is aware of those decisions, we will all be successful. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lieberich.
Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you, and thank you for your leadership. I know I have 5 minutes, and I can talk a long time about the DATA Act because
the earlier folks each left an extra minute, so without objection, you can have up to 7, no problem.
Thank you. What I thought I would do is I would spend a few seconds talking about the importance of data, how we've approached this initiative, and then finally what Treasury is doing with respect to implementation. There is enormous power in data, and open data allows us to make better decisions and allows us to run government in a more efficient and effective fashion. It leads to a more informed citizenry, it leads to better innovation, and it leads ultimately to better government. We have seen the power of data, and as was mentioned by Senator Warner in his remarks, in the best-run public and private sector organizations, the strategic CFO function owns the data and links that data to everyday operating activity. And one of the reasons why I think we've been fairly successful in our efforts to reach out to the federal community is because the federal CFO community understands that the Data Act will significantly improve their ability to fulfill their responsibilities as a CFO. While we are talking about a fairly innovative approach as we go about this project, and I think that's one of the things we need to talk about with the agencies about how we're actually implementing. The underlying principle is very well understood within the federal government and the need to do these things. There was a discussion earlier about multiple systems in different agencies, and one of the real difficulties we have right now is there are too many systems in government, and data is siloed in different areas, and it's very difficult to actually find that data and use it. And so we spend too much time on data calls. We spend too much time trying to find information and then actually trying to make sure it reconciles and is useful. And the Data Act has enormous potential to actually get at that issue within government. We also know that better data leads to better decisions, and the CFO function can actually have a much more strategic role within the federal government. We also know that better data can lead to innovation, both within government and outside of government. When you look at examples like the GPS that people use on a daily basis, you look at the National Weather Service, those are examples of open data that the government provides to the private sector and uses that information to improve the lives of Americans in a number of ways. And so when we're looking at our information that we have, I would say we're similarly trying to look at how we can use financial data to better inform citizens and allow them to understand government better, but also to potentially drive innovation. With respect to how we approach the initiative, we had a number of principles that we looked at. Something like this, a major initiative, needs leadership, and the Data Act clearly puts forward the Treasury and OMB need to work together to provide that leadership. Dave and I are accountable for this, and we know that. There needs to be a vision and a direction, clarity of purpose. There needs to be a roadmap with milestones and roles and responsibilities that have been identified. That's why very rarely is this chart very far away from me, which sort of says this is what the governance structure is going to be with respect to implementation and how we're going to implement the Act with respect to roles and responsibilities. We also need to make sure that we're doing consultation and collaboration. And so some of the underlying principles are we need to build on existing efforts within government. We need to make sure that we're collaborating. We need to make sure that we're leveraging industry standards and practices so that we're not reinventing the wheel in many cases. We've also identified this effort as data-centric and therefore not an initiative which is going to be building large new systems. I think some of the things that we've learned in Treasury over time is that when we put new standards in place, it oftentimes is very difficult to make the changes to the underlying systems and expensive to make those changes. So in this particular case, we've talked about a data-centric approach. That is, the ability to try to access the data in the agencies, not changing the underlying systems, but tagging the data and mapping the data so we can actually extract it from a variety of systems and use it more effectively. We also very much want to make sure it's agency-centric. In the past, the initiatives have been information comes to Treasury, and the agencies don't own it. So in this effort, we're really talking about how to make sure that the agencies themselves own the data and therefore the ones who are going to make the best use of it and have the best interest in ensuring the underlying quality of the data as we're going through the implementation process. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about what Treasury is doing with respect to the implementation. We established a program management office headed by a senior executive, that program management office is helping drive the vision as well as making sure that Treasury is fulfilling its responsibilities under the Act. Treasury has responsibilities under the legislation to do a blueprint and a roadmap, and that is to look through where data exists across agencies and in systems and saying, how can we tag that data across those different systems? We have to do data exchange standards, and that is what format is the data going to be used so it's machine readable and usable outside of the Treasury. And we also have the responsibility for doing data analytics, of building the data analytics function. We also are very much keenly involved in the outreach and making sure that we're collaborating and reaching out to industry and government to make sure that we're understanding what the best practices are and advocacy groups so that we're very much trying to make sure that this is implemented in a very smart and effective way. That concludes, I think I've gotten pretty close, my remarks. But I once again say we really do view this as an opportunity. It's something that I know when we look at it within Treasury, we know it can have an opportunity to really make a difference in government. And so we talk about better data, better decisions, better government. And the Act, I think, is going to be very helpful in advancing those objectives. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to not throw a curve, but I'm going to talk about something that's not explicit in the Act that's extremely important. Mr. Dodaro, you, of course, know about the RAT Board and what they do, but maybe for both of you, we could have an open dialogue about what, under the Recovery Act, was called the RAT. Years ago, almost every member of this committee was encouraged and went over, and they saw during the spending of that nearly $800 billion under the Recovery Act, they saw that center find areas of waste or fraud that previously were not found in real time. A good example would be a number of individuals, criminal individuals, who pretended to be doctors from the Midwest, set up a facility in California in a matter of minutes on what was in fact a pilot. And they had jurisdiction only because of a few dollars being spent in that area. They were able to determine that this was an anomaly. They were able to then take open source material and actually look at Google Earth and look at the building that made no sense at all. Mater, you're obviously familiar with it. Made no sense at all. And to say, wait a second here, there's something wrong there. Then they used a high-tech instrument called a telephone, and they called the doctor's offices. And were immediately told, of course the doctors are not practicing in California. They're Kansans, they're Missourians, and so on. That technology was startlingly improving our ability to go after waste, fraud, and abuse. It is not explicit, but it is an area of concern, both that the GAO have access to that capability, that all of the Inspector Generals have access to that capability, particularly because IGs, as you all know, generally see a stovepipe of their area of jurisdiction. Well, the database that you will be producing would allow, with the right safeguards, them to look across platforms to be able to find out, for example, that an individual had been debarred somewhere else, et cetera. What will you be doing to preserve and hopefully keep operational either the RAT Board or a next-generation equivalent? Mr. Mader.
Mr. Chairman, I was nodding my head because I also, in the short time that I was back in government, had an opportunity to go over and spend time with the team over there.
And we might mention Earl Devaney's pride and joy was exactly that example, because it was so much faster than the normal 90 days after we get defrauded, we find out where they used to be before they leave.
Right. And in my private sector life for the last 10, 11 years, actually I've done a lot of work in the area of how do you sort of unleash the power of these siloed databases. And I really want to defer to my colleague, Dave Librick, but want to sort of set the stage, because Treasury, as you know, has had now for a number of years an operation called Do Not Pay Business Center. And we've seen, even though it's only developing the last several years, some real benefits across government in identifying the kinds of situations that you have commented on. And I think that with the Data Act and the ability to break down these silos and to make this data available not just to the public but to internal government oversight organizations, we should see more and more of the examples that you articulated, because it's not about the technology is important, but it's about the data. And we have this data that's been locked in these silos, and Treasury's done some very significant things in a short matter of 2 years in sort of opening up our eyes for the entire government, saying, look, if I can start running payments past disparate databases that I didn't necessarily have access to, I can do exactly what you said, Mr. Chairman. I can start stopping the payments before they're made, because I think we all know that pay and chase is not the future. But I think the Data Act combined with Treasury's capabilities is going to allow us to stop it before it goes out the door. Thank you.
Mr. Liebrick, not only would I like you to comment on that, but I'd also hope that you could include what your plans are to make sure that in the President's budget there are sufficient funds for that portion of the operation, please.
You'll be pleased to know that we've been working closely with the Recovery Board on this issue. And in fact, we've hired several of their personnel who actually ran the ROC, is now running as a senior person in our Do Not Pay effort. And so we've been really trying to leverage that expertise and that knowledge. As Dave mentioned, we have a number of databases which we're actually matching against right now as well, and we're building that functionality. We're really trying to leverage what was learned at the Recovery Board and implementing that and putting that in the Do Not Pay effort as we're going along. Right now, I think that one of the real big things we're going to have is how do you then sort of build that analytical function. And so one of the things that we've been doing is we have a lot of information on payments. And so what we're doing for really the first time is looking at payment history files and saying, look, if there's payments that are being made to the same address from different agencies, if there are payments that are being made to foreign countries, if there's unusual things that are occurring in the payment, how do we actually sort of queue that information up and then refer it to the IG or investigate further about whether those are proper payments? And over the coming, that's one of the real high priorities we have within the Bureau in the coming year, to really build that functionality and make it more systematic. With respect to additional databases, we're in the process of bringing more searchable databases in, like the Death Master File. Right now, we only have access to the public Death Master File. We very much would like to have access to the private Death Master File, which is more expansive. We have the excluded parties list that we're matching against right now. CAVERS, which is for debtors, we're building that into the functionality, making sure we're not paying prisoners. That functionality is coming in the coming year as well. So we're really trying to make sure that we do exactly what you point out, is making sure government is not making payments to people it shouldn't be making payments to.
And just a quick one, and I'll give additional time to the ranking member, but the criminal portion, is there a fast track anticipated so that in addition to stopping the payment that you have a very accurate link to see that there is a criminal investigation when appropriate?
I'm not sure how much linkage we have on criminal investigations right now. If they're on excluded parties list, it would show up in that database as going through. With respect to prisoners, sometimes that's a problem. We do have access to—
You can only lock them up so many times.
Right. So we are putting that database in place as something we can match against.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, as I listened to you, I think the thing that you said that should concern all of us is the issue of whether information going into this system is complete. Because without good information, I mean, we might as well go home. So do you think that first of all, it's the agency's responsibility to get this information in. Do you think there's enough of a hammer, there's enough of tools to push the agencies to get the information that we need? Because, a lot of times I look at government and I get a little frustrated because people say, well, when the rubber meets the road, everything's going to be fine. And then when it comes time for the rubber to meet the road, there's no road. And we saw that in Katrina. I mean, I could go on. And so, but I'm trying to figure out, I don't want us to be sitting here thinking that we're doing something that we're not. And certainly without information, without accurate and complete information. I'm trying to figure out, well, what's the point? Please.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, I have been concerned. We've issued 2 reports since USAspending.gov initially was put into place in practice on reporting on expenditures from fiscal year 2007. In 2008, we found data problems, and we went in 2012 and found completeness and accuracy problems as well. Now, the Data Act helps address this by having regular reviews by the Inspectors General to provide an additional oversight tool on a regular basis that I believe will help. But right now, there are no sanctions or anything in there. But I think it's something I'm going to pay a lot of attention to, and the GAO will, because to get the full benefits of this, you have to make it accessible and transparent, but it has to be right.
Right.
The data has to be accurate, and it has to be complete. And without that, you really are limited in your ability to use this powerful tool that we're providing to people.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you like what you see with regard to OMB and Treasury and their efforts to implement?
I think they're off to a good start in terms of getting organized, getting the governance structure in place. They've outreached and got stakeholder involvement, which we believe is important. I think the pilot's important to reduce recipient burden and reporting and to consolidate some of the requirements. That's a very good start. So I think they're off to a good start, but the experience that we've seen at the GAO is the agency implementation part of this is where the weak link is, where it breaks down.
Now, you said in your written testimony that, the Data Act has increased oversight in detecting and preventing fraud. Is that right?
Yes.
One challenge agencies face in reducing fraud is a lack of transparency between contractors and subsidiaries, and their subsidiaries. Agencies currently track contractors through a unique identifying number called the DUNS number. This number is assigned through an exclusive contract with the company Dun & Bradstreet. Is that right?
That's correct.
Many companies have multiple subsidiaries with different DUNS numbers. So a company that commits fraud can sometimes get around past performance reviews that should disqualify it from doing business with the government. It appears that one government contractor, USIS, tried to do just that. The Department of Justice alleged in a recent False Claims Act suit that top USIS officials engaged in a massive $1 billion scheme to defraud the federal government in the company's contracts to conduct background checks. Yet, despite these grave allegations, the Department of Homeland Security awarded USIS a new contract this summer. Mr. Darrow, does this raise any concerns for you?
Well, we issued a report a couple years ago on the government's use of the DUNS numbers, raising some concerns about the government being so dependent on a sole proprietary set of information. And the costs were going up because of that, and there were limitations that were put on the government by the contractor. And so we encourage GSA to take another look at this issue. Now they have, and they've put in place a replacement system off of a system that was in place at the Department of Defense. It's called the CAGE system. It's in the Federal Acquisition Regulations now, and it'll set up a government-owned identifier, but it will, to your point, also provide linkages to the next tier up of a company and the top tier of the company if they're affiliated companies.
So is that in effect now?
I believe, yes. Yes, it's in effect now, but it'll be transitioned over time.
Okay, well, yeah. On October 20th, GAO upheld a bid protest by one of USIS's competitors. In its decision, GAO concluded that DHS, and I quote, failed to obtain and consider the specific allegations of fraud alleged by the Department of Justice. GAO, end of quote, GAO also found that DHS, and I quote, failed to consider the close relationship between the awardee and its parent company. Now, the system that you just talked about, this new system, would it detect that?
It's supposed to, going forward, right.
Can you get me some additional information on that? Because I'd like to have that.
Sure.
One problem here was that the U.S. USIS subsidiary bidding for the DHS contract had a different DUNS number than the subsidiary accused of fraud against the United States taxpayers. Do you believe it is possible to link the DUNS numbers of subsidiaries to make it easier for contracting officers to check this information before awarding new contracts to companies that defraud taxpayers?
I think I'll have to get back to you on the specifics as it relates to the DUNS numbers specifically, but the effort that the government puts in place, ultimately, whether it uses that system or another system, should be able to do what you're talking about and should be able to do it on a consistent basis. But again, what we've learned from our experience is the same thing on excluded parties list about whether it should be checked before making awards. That's been in place for years. Oftentimes, the agencies don't execute properly against the requirements. So you need both. You need the capability and you need the management discipline to execute properly.
Last question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Does everyone on the panel agree that we should consider ways to ensure that the government has access to the data it needs to identify links between companies and their subsidiaries? Mr. Marty?
Absolutely. I agree with what Mr. Dodaro said. I mean, it's not a technical issue per se. It's really, and it goes back to one of the fundamentals of the Data Act, is how are we going to define identifier, both the parent as well as the children of those companies. So yes, we can deal with that during implementation as well.
Sure.
I agree.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dodaro, because you're answering the ranking member's question, I'd want to expand it just a small amount. Under the CAGE system, one of the complaints that DOD contractors have had for years is they can be locked out of new contracts because of a merger or a divestiture, because that's a fairly cumbersome system. So as you're answering his question for how we stop fraud, like the USIS complaint that he had, but also how would we streamline that to make sure that, which often happens, somebody acquires somebody or a unit is spun off or sold to another account, and literally DOD finds themselves unable to issue a new contract until somehow they can reconcile the unique identity of something that has become no longer part of a parent. So I think Mr. Cummings' point is extremely good, that it's the combination of, if you will, a DUNS, which is quickly assigned, versus a CAGE system, which can be very cumbersome when even very, Rockwell's and Lockheed's, very large companies sometimes sell a unit to each other and find themselves in a real conundrum. So if you would answer it fully, I think it would help us understand the implementation of the Data Act.
We will definitely do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lankford.
Thank you. Let me join others in the accolades for getting a chance to serve with this chairman, and very much appreciate the time to be able to serve with him in the way that he's handled things here. Mr. Comptroller, I want to make a couple of comments on some comments that you have in your written statements, as well as you've made some in your oral statements as well. From your written statement to us, it said that the Data Act was enacted to help address these challenges. Among other things, Data Act requires, number one, the establishment of government-wide data standards by May 2015. How's it going on that? We have a firm deadline on that to have those data standards in place. What's the progress report?
Well, I think that the Treasury and OMB and the agencies are off to a good start. They've got task forces set up by HHS to look at the award data and DOD to look at the contract data and come up with common data elements. So they're laying the initial framework. They have a long way to go, though, before they're going to have the standards in place. We will be evaluating their progress and commenting on those standards that they will be issued in May. So we're tracking it very closely, but I'm encouraged that at least they're getting organized across the government to address these issues and to use some things that are already in place, which will help expedite implementation.
Right. Mr. Mader, is that an achievable goal to be able to get there by May of next year?
Congressman, that's our goal. As Mr. Dodaro mentioned, we quickly, actually, when we looked at some of these aggressive dates, we put in place not just the governance and the planning process, but we actually put together a working team between HHS and DOD to actually start working on what we believe are the critical ones.
So what are the major threats to not achieving that goal? Is it a hardware, software issue? Is it agency communication? Is it training? What's the major threat to not achieving that goal?
For this particular goal, it's really, we have the right resources, and it's, just keeping the focus, and, the folks that we have identified from both of those departments are advocates of what we're trying to accomplish. So, my expectation is we will make good progress.
So help me understand here. So it's a matter of just management, of getting everybody flying in formation, to use a better term. You have the software you need, you have the hardware you need, you have the plan in place. It's just a matter of getting every agency to actually implement it?
Well, I think, Congressman, what we're talking about is coming up with uniform definitions that can be used across government. So we're really not in the technology and moving data around. We're just getting a clear definition of a core group of terms so that whether you're dealing with an acquisition or you're dealing with a grant, let's use, place of business means the same, regardless of a government contract or a grant to a university. And so that is really just intellectual work that needs to be done over the next several months.
While we're on that conversation, let's talk a little bit about the definition of the word program, which has been a much discussed definition of what does that mean. I know there are some GAO reports on that, and OMB has basically said let the agencies determine on that, but there has to be some sort of uniform system of how do we actually define the word program from place to place so that we know that we get accurate information. So how is that coming, and what is the progress on trying to get the word program defined?
Actually, within the statute, there's a statutory definition of program activity, and it basically ties back to both accounting and financial management and the budget. So we're basically using that as sort of the framework and the bedrock, and looking at, here's what the statute says the definition of program activity is, and now the trick is going to be how do we ensure that it is interpreted correctly and consistently across the breadth of the government.
So that should be complete by May 15 as well, trying to get that definition across the agencies so they have a consistent understanding of that word?
I think, Congressman, it will be easy to convey the definition. The challenge is going to come in the actual implementation over time.
I understand. That's become the question on it. So is that a May 15, or do you think that's a couple of years from now before everyone actually falls into line with a clear understanding and implementation of that?
I think it's a very iterative concept that not only the program activity, but a lot of the other definitions, it's a matter of educating people, recognizing that, in May we're not actually going to start moving data around, but we need the foundation of an understanding across government and across the different communities that this word means the same regardless of whether you're in DOD or DHS or HHS, so that we have that consistency. It's about education, sir.
Okay, good. Let me ask one more brief question there. Mr. Chairman, do I have 1 minute to ask one more additional question? Thank you for your generosity on that. Mr. Darrow, you have a statement in your written testimony says that well, let me just read it. In June 2014, we reported that while agencies generally reported contract information as required, many assistance programs, grants, or loans were not reported. What did you find from that?
We basically found there were 324 programs that were not reported, totaling about $619 billion of assistance. Now, when we brought it to the attention of some of the agencies, they have reported some of the information subsequently, but other programs have not, including many programs at the VA have not yet. So we're continuing to follow up on that.
Obviously, in many agencies, there are more grants than there are contracts that are going out now. So that's pretty important that we get the grant and loan part of this as well, consistent with it. And obviously, Data Act is making that same request as well to be able to coincide with that. Is that progress ongoing that you think that that's going to also make deadlines and targets at this point to be able to get grant loan information as well as contract information?
Yeah, you have many more agencies involved, as you point out, in the grant area, so that you need to bring them into line in terms of compliance. So there's more people to monitor in that activity. HHS is a big player, obviously, but many agencies do that, where in the contract areas, it's largely a few agencies let most of the contracts. So it'll be a greater challenge for OMB and Treasury to exercise oversight over the agencies, and hopefully the IG reviews will demonstrate that as well. So I'm hopeful there'll be better progress, but it has to be priority for the agencies, and hopefully the administration will make it one. One of the reasons I want to be so active in this is that the initial implementation of this legislation, we've talked about the May dates, but there's dates for 17 and 18 for the agencies to actually implement these things. The initial implementation of this legislation will span 2 administrations. So there needs to be continuity among the administrations to make sure that this operates effectively, and that's one of the things GAO can do, is try to help urge the administration to maintain continuity.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence on that.
You're most welcome. Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You used your small gavel to clamp down on the acclamations to you. I can understand that, so I'm going to have to use my own time. But it's worth it, because mine is the only jurisdiction which has to come before this committee. And, Mr. Chairman, I cannot thank you enough for the way in which you have upheld the principle of democratic local government. And that is something to say when you consider this committee, because it's a very contentious committee with differences on national issues. This chairman never let those differences, never required or thought that I should change my view on those national issues in order to get the assistance of the chairman on matters affecting the District of Columbia. Helped us keep the place open. He was helpful in matters coming through this committee. When they came through this committee, sometimes I had to ask, can we jump onto your markup? He was always willing to do that and to help us in the Senate as well, but particularly for respecting what I think is a bipartisan principle, that local government is for local government. You have been invaluable as chairman of this committee to the District of Columbia, and I thank you for it.
Thank you, gentlady.
I just have a question to make sure that there is not, for a bill that I don't think will cost that much to implement, an elephant in the room. If you will forgive me, it will save so much money in the long run, perhaps even the short run. Senator Warner said something as a business person to invest. Of course, you have to invest in order to save money. Congress doesn't operate that way. It operates on annual appropriation. It's supposed to save year by year, and so it ends up spending much more money than it should. So this matter is not for the administration alone, and I don't think it should be. And you keep saying, you know, deadlines can be met. You don't see any threats, you said, to the last member to its implementation. But I do note in your testimony, Mr. Liebrick, that you were candid in saying that the Data Act did not provide any additional resources to the agencies, and you and I both know those agencies are under severe restraints. Even before sequester, they were under had faced huge cuts. We're only talking about $300 million over 4 years, 2014 to 2018. And the estimate was only $2 or $3 million per agency. Of course, that could mean staff, that could mean whether you're moving or not. And I wonder, have you done any internal estimates to identify the cost of implementing the Data Act for agencies? Because this gets to be particularized when we talk about the other priorities they face.
Ms. Norton, as I mentioned in, I think, both my written as well as my oral comments, the CBO, when the bill was moving towards passage and eventual signature, had initially scored it at the $300 million figure that you noted, but that was, you know, back 7 months ago. And it was, you know, based on what they knew at the time, and it was primarily focused on Treasury effort. But I think, as all of the witnesses have talked about, including the 2 senators, that this is a pretty extensive effort to go into hundreds of stovepiped data systems. First of all, identify what those data elements are, get agreement on standardization, and then be able to, and Treasury is looking at some innovative techniques on how to do this, pull that data together so that we can display it in an intelligible way, you know, on this new website. So the short answer is we're working on our own estimates now of what the level of effort will be.
So you don't think the $300 million estimate is correct at this time? It's what CBO
I think it's a good down payment.
But it's going to cost more than that.
It's hard to tell right now. We're actually now out asking agencies to start looking at their current environment, and Mr. Dodaro mentioned the number of different, let's say, in DoD systems. You know, what is it going to cost to identify the data elements across 200 systems?
Are those funds going to have to come from whatever funds they already have?
Well, you know, unfortunately, there was no funding in 14, and we actually started our work in 14.
Mr. Liebrick, you mentioned this in your own testimony. And again, I don't know how we can just skip over that. There's no funds in the bill There's no funds in this appropriation. This is a task that the agencies have never done before. How do you expect an agency, particularly a complicated agency, to go at doing what it's never done before with no new funds? And what should happen now to make sure that there are resources, in fact, resources allocated to save the extraordinary amount of funds that you know will be saved in the long run? What steps should be taken now? Because they're going to throw up their hands and they're going to say, look, this is complicated, we don't have the money, we don't have the staff.
The first step is to come up with an estimate based on what we see now as not only the specifics with regard to the deliverables and the timelines, but also our sort of basic understanding of what the level of effort is.
Wouldn't it be honest in the next budget, when the agency goes to the OMB, to ask for whatever funds it would take to begin implementation of this, so that we're not stalled by agencies having to look to whether or not it has funds? I can tell you this right now. If it does not have the funds, there is very little incentive for an agency to dip into its already cut budget and begin anew on a brand new unprecedented project.
My indication, Ms. Norton, is that we actually can't wait till next year, that it's going to be a this year problem.
For the President's budget, agencies can ask for
well,
for
the current fiscal year that we're in, we're doing, as I mentioned, on data definitions, we're doing sort of the intellectual work, but we're going to quickly move in the springtime into more detailed work across the breadth of the agencies, and therein lies, to your point, the challenge that there is a sort of unfunded mandate for them to do that.
The President's budget being made now for, what is it, 16? Is it being
for 16? It's under consideration.
Are you working with the agencies to make sure they ask for the funds? A small amount of money, at least based on these, certainly a startup.
That's why we've gone out and asked them for what is your initial estimate to get started.
That's very reassuring.
Would the gentlelady yield?
Yes, sir.
And this may be part of your question, but if we could perhaps expand it, there are billions of dollars worth of money that is spent, $82 billion, developing systems, IT, et cetera, some of which is for accounting and reporting. So I think the gentlelady's question is a very good one. I would hope that we could expand it to make sure that we look at how much was already there to do financial accounting and reporting, so that we understand that the $300 million that this started off with, and it kept shrinking, by the way, because systems that were already ordered to be done were being rolled out. So things that they said would have to be done to comply with it, that number kept going down. So as long as we understand the scope of how many millions or billions of dollars are already being spent, then I think we get a good idea of whether there's an incremental cost or in the 10-year window an incremental savings. And hopefully it's both, an incremental cost that's reported and we fund, an incremental savings that in the 10-year window allows us to be neutral or even a savings. If that's your question.
It is, and that's the way to look at it, it seems to me, over a 10-year period. But that may require some upfront investment, and I do agree with the Chairman, some of these funds might be used to begin this project. We wouldn't want any data to be lost in the transition, however.
We now go to the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney, if you're prepared.
Thank you. Thank you for this really important hearing. I thank the ranking member for working on this, and you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to ask Mr. Librick, during an interview about the Data Act in October, you said, and I quote, "Agencies need to own the data and use the data." And if agencies have a sense of ownership of the data they report, do you believe that they will increase the accuracy and utility of it? Why is that so important that you were mentioning it?
So I think this is really one of the critical underpinnings about successful implementation of the Act. If we ensure that the agencies own this data and use it, they will make the changes they need to make. If it is a compliance effort in which we're simply doing this for the sake of actually checking a box, it won't be successful. If it is a Treasury-centric view, it won't be successful. If it's a Treasury OMB-centric view, it won't be successful. It really has to be owned by the CFO and by the agency, because that's where the real decisions and where the data has value. I mean, if you're a CFO and you're looking to do a data call, which we ask them to do all the time, and it's very expensive and very difficult to do that. And they have difficult times doing that. If we can give the business proposition, the value proposition of saying, if you have better access to that data, you can do that much more efficiently. You can use that information to make better decisions. You can inform the public better about the value you're providing with your services. And that's why I think we've been really very keen on engaging the agency. So when we have this implementation structure, you see all the interagency councils that are part of the advisory group that's there. And we're asking those members not only to represent their communities, but also to use their expertise as senior leaders within their organization to bring that wisdom to bear about how to best implement the Act. And so when we have this discussion about, data-centric and agency-centric, it resonates with them a lot.
Okay. Now, as I understand it, by 2017, you're going to have data elements standards have to be published, right? And this is going to be agency-wide throughout government, but they're not required internally to use these standards? Why not? Why wouldn't we require them to use it? If you're going to try to, and will every agency, and where will these standards come from? Will Treasury be the final person that puts out these standards? Or?
So OMB is responsible for the data standard setting process. So maybe I should make sure they speak, but I'll just say a couple things on that. One is we are leveraging, as we referenced earlier, both the procurement community and the grants community have been doing some preliminary work on this issue about those data standards. We recently put out on something called GitHub into the public domain so that the public can see what those standards are. And we put out roughly, I think, 50 or 60 of those in the public domain for them to take a look at. And that's an open forum for people to comment on. We're also then going back into the communities and making sure that we get feedback about whether we have the right data standards and whether they're usable and the like.
But why in the world would we not require the agencies to use the same standards that we're trying to make agencies? I guess that's one question. But also you had another important point in one of your comments. You said that if we had these standards, then agencies and workers and everyone would be able to use analytics more, and this would overall help government. And how would shifting the focus to using analytics help agencies in saving taxpayers' dollars?
Let me start, and maybe Dave wants to add, but with regard to the use of the standards, they're not optional. These are going to be mandatory standards that will be used across government, because I think as Mr. Dodaro testified, the problem is that the way we have these diverse systems now, people chose to interpret and define some of these standards their own particular way, whether they were in the acquisition community or the grants community. And what we're doing now as part of this standardization under the Data Act is we will have uniform definitions that will be used across government consistently, because that's the only way we're going to be able to pull the data out of these disparate databases and bring them together. So it's not optional, it's going to be mandatory.
Well, this is really major. I think this is a major improvement in government, and I applaud everyone who's working on it. But would you comment a little further, Mr. Librick, on how analytics are going to help us manage better, being able to use this?
So this really gets to kind of the power of data. Right now, when we're doing things like benchmarking across government, what is the government paying for a cell phone plan in one agency versus another? What's it paying for pencils? What's the things it's doing?
Yeah, this is great.
It's also really important, which is if the public and industry sees that information, when they bid on government work, it will drive the cost down. So there's a real powerful value there for both us internally understanding what our costs are and benchmarking, but also in terms of letting the industry know about what's going on. So when they bid for government work, it drives those costs down. Significant savings can be found in that.
Look, could you give an example of an agency that's working to use funding data to derive decision-making into better ways for our government? A specific example.
Well, I think if I were to sort of use an example that cuts across both external and internal, I would use something like NOAA, which is putting information out there right now. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal several months back about how on the Weather Channel right now, someone is using that information to decide what ads are run in different markets, so that you actually then have the ability to target what you're doing based on something like the weather. And that actually improves things significantly. So I think that as it relates to external uses of data, there are a number of examples. Internally, we've been going through an example about, what are we paying for human resources within government? and looking across agencies. And while the data isn't real good yet, it is making us asking lots of questions. A high number may not necessarily be bad if you're saying you're investing in your workforce. So if you're spending a lot on human capital, it may be the exact right thing you should be doing because you're giving the training and the expertise to have a more qualified workforce. On the other hand, if you're paying a lot for transactions, you may be saying, why are we spending so much money on transactions and not enough on sort of really added value things? So the initiative that OMB is leading right now in benchmarking is actually trying to drive that thinking government-wide about how analytics can really help improve government.
This is a really important improvement, and I congratulate all of you, and my time has expired. Thank you.
As we go to the gentleman from Massachusetts, if I could have just 10 seconds. Mr. Liebrick, you said something very important, and I don't want it to fail to be understood. If we can make the true purchase price not by which vendor we bought it by, but the true purchase price, we do create an amount that we want to pay the same or less than in the future, and that's almost always opaque to the competing market and even to the public. So I appreciate the fact that you see that as a benefit. Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just in regards to your service here in the committee, I know that Teddy Roosevelt had a great quote. He said, "Far and away, the best prize that life offers us is the ability to work hard at work that is worth doing." And I know we've had differences of opinion and conclusion over the years that you've served this committee, and that's understandable given the variety of issues that we've had come up here. But I have to say that you have, in your time, you have taken this work seriously. You have worked hard at it, and you know that's to your credit. You have taken your work seriously. You worked hard at it. We always didn't arrive at the same conclusion, but I still have enormous respect for the way you approached your work, the professional manner in which you conducted yourself and led this committee. Sometimes us coming along unwillingly, sometimes otherwise, but I think you did good work on behalf of the taxpayer and the American citizen, and I congratulate you on your service.
Well, I thank you, and I leave postal reform in your good hands.
Yeah, don't you threaten me. And also your staff. Your staff has done a wonderful job as well, and I know you've had an assortment of staffers over the years, but very, very, very strong staff, and a pleasure to work with them. I want to go back to the ranking member's comments, and thank you each for your willingness to work with the committee, and thank you for your service to our country. I want to go back to what the ranking member was talking about the DUNS numbers, and I think he hit on something that it really needs, we need to drill down on that a little bit. You know, it's stunning, Mr. Dodaro, that we had over 300 programs that didn't report on US.gov, totaling $619 billion. That's amazing that these companies and programs did not report their spending to the American people, and that troubles me greatly. I was wondering, are there some repeat offenders in that group, or is that spread across government? I know that DOD is responsible for about 50% of our discretionary budget, but are there some groups that are more frequent offenders of the non-reporting?
Yeah, of the $619 billion that was not reported, a large share of it came in healthcare spending, actually, in the Medicare program, which is supposed to report aggregate amounts spent by counties across the country. And in other areas, the Veterans Administration was not reporting a lot of its spending as well in the healthcare area and other areas. And then the rest of it was really spread around to a wide variety of agencies. You know, hopefully we've asked OMB to clarify the guidance, and I know they're in the process of doing that, which will help ensure we don't have recurring repeats of this in the future. But that's what we found for that year.
Okay. Mr. Mader, I know you had a joint town hall meeting with OMB and Treasury regarding the Data Act, and I know there were a lot of these open government groups that were there. they talked about the DUNS number issue. And so the DUNS number is a unique identifier for any entity that does business with the government, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, and the government pays Dun & Bradstreet for the ability to use data associated with the DUNS number. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And according to my records, the current contract with Dun & Bradstreet is for 8 years and at a cost of $154 million. Is that about right?
Mr. Congressman, that particular area is not within my portfolio.
Okay,
it's actually being handled by another one of my colleagues at OMB.
Okay. Mr. Dodaro, in 2012, GAO issued a report finding, they quote, this is a quote, "A monopoly for Dun & Bradstreet has been created as a result of a specific reference in regulations governing contracting." Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So right now, basically what we're doing is we pay Dun & Bradstreet for our own information. Is that right?
Well, we pay for the use of their number, which we're tied to. And
Yeah.
that was the concern we raised, is that it made the government so dependent on it, and you really had disadvantages because the cost kept increasing. The figures you cited were right. They were out of our report on the cost, but it's increased considerably over time. And also the company in this case could put limitations on the government's use of the numbers, and actually that concerns us as well.
Yeah, that's the point I'm getting to. I know that in a recent example, the RAT board that the chairman referenced decided to terminate its contract with Dun & Bradstreet because it would have cost taxpayers between $900,000 and $1.4 million for just 1 year of data, of our own data, getting back from Dun & Bradstreet. And the recovery board was paying for the right to display on its website existing data about spending on under the Recovery Act. And again, you anticipated my question. Would it concern you if the government's use of data is to identify waste, fraud, and abuse is limited by Dun & Bradstreet?
Yeah, the government, our basic point here was the government needs options, and
Right.
it has the ability to create this themselves, or at least have options so you're not dependent just on one source.
Right. So my question for Mr. Mader and Mr. Lebrecht, can we get away from that? Are we working on that to get away from this limitation that Dun & Bradstreet has for us to use information that's helping us, to hopefully run the government in a more efficient manner?
Congressman, I know that this other office within OMB, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, is working that issue with the General Services Administration, and I think they've had some correspondence with the committee on that recently.
Yeah, that would be a terrible bottleneck, if we had this, this limitation at the whim of Dun & Bradstreet, that they would be able to withhold information or limit information, its availability to those who would need to use it because of this contract. It just seems extortive in a sense. So, and an 8-year contract. So that's not wise. I think we need to rethink what we're doing there. We can't. You're creating a bottleneck in the system by allowing them to control all that data. So it's useless if we can't access it. And I'm just raising that concern now because I don't. We've got some change going on here, some transition, and I don't want that feature in the new iteration of this website. Thank you. I yield back, Mr.
I thank you. I thank you for pointing out that we should always have competition and not have a sole source, particularly for something that is so key to the tracking of metadata. And with that, we go to my partner in crime on this piece of legislation, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to the panel for being here today. Very thoughtful conversation. Mr. Dodaro, GAO identified a lack of information about investments as a major challenge in eliminating wasteful spending, correct?
Yes.
And in the 2014 report on duplicative and wasteful spending, you identified IT investments, which concern both the chairman and myself, particularly at the Department of Defense, and found 31 potentially duplicative investments accounting for at least $1.2 billion in cost at DOD between 2007 and 2012. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is there something about the Pentagon that seems particularly problematic when it comes to transparency, accountability, waste, fraud, and abuse, efficiency, and even some sense of we need to get in line like everybody else?
Yeah, well, as you know, with this committee's sponsorship over years, we keep a list of areas that are at risk, highest risk across the government of fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. And of the 30 areas that we currently have on the list, at least 6 or 7 are DoD business systems, contract management, financial management, IT management over at the department. It's a large, decentralized operation, many systems, prone to reinventing things within each service. So it's been an area, given our statutory requirement to look at overlap and duplication and fragmentation of the federal government, has been one of our key areas that we've been looking at. So they are prone to have these type of problems.
Mr. Mader, you talked, and it was very welcome to me, that the Data Act might help serve to break down stovepipes. Because stovepipes often, they may start out with good reason, but they often lead to inefficiency and lack of ability to sort of collaborate and cooperate and learn from others. Can we take that same principle and help rein in the Pentagon in terms of its practices, which seem, frankly, at variance with the rest of the government?
I think some of the principles that we're going to apply government-wide for the Data Act certainly would be applicable to DoD. And I think, as Mr. Dodaro stated, that is a very large, complex, worldwide organization. And, stovepipes grow up in any organization all the time. I think if some of the very creative and I think leading-edge concepts that Treasury is exploring on how we're going to extract data from these various stovepipes, that concept could easily be applied as well to DoD.
I thought I heard you say earlier that this was not going to be something that was voluntary. This was going to be mandatory compliance with the Data Act. Is that correct?
Oh, the data standards for sure. Yes, sir.
And that applies to the Pentagon?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, that's reassuring. Mr. Lebrick, you talked about the potentiality with the Data Act of actually saving money, because with that transparency, with people actually seeing what it costs, that idea spreads, and we kind of drive ourselves down to, well, I can get it for that instead of that. You want to elaborate a little bit more on that? Because that's also a great potential and a very welcome message here in the Hill, and I think to taxpayers.
Sure. I think there's a couple I'd even add to it, which is one of the visions for the administration is to move to fewer core financial systems in a shared services model. And so we at the Bureau of Treasury run something called ARC. It's a franchise fund, and we provide accounting services to different agencies. When we recently upgraded the core financial system for 40 of our customers, we did that for $300,000 per customer. And that's a remarkable number relative to what many agencies are doing with respect to either upgrading systems. And that the power of that is that we have the expertise with that financial system. We understand the vendor, we understand the underlying accounting system, and that when we then roll it out, we're doing it in an expert way. And one of the things government doesn't do very well across government is manage projects. And so if you have an entity that's very good at managing projects and managing implementation, for those 40 customers, they're not really worried about that. And importantly, the CFO of those agencies, and the CFO when I was the Bureau head, spent very little of her time on systems issues. Now, I've talked to some CFOs who spend 25 to 50% of their time on systems issues, not on being a CFO. And so when you move toward this vision the administration has of moving to fewer core financial systems and having the ability to actually get the data more easily, there are significant opportunities for savings across government and improving the way government operates. So I think it's not just some of the things I talked about, benchmarking and the ability to have fewer people doing data calls because you can do it more easily, but it's also about the infrastructure of government being more efficient. And as I said, we've seen within my own portfolio significant savings and opportunities by moving to this kind of model.
Yeah, certainly the chairman and I have tried to address some of that in IT investments and procurement because we've found incredible inefficiencies. and we're hopeful that the legislation where Congress, I hope, is about to approve will help streamline that process and make it more efficient. And I know we can count on Mr. Dodaro to monitor the implementation of that and to give new power to CIOs to make more efficient decisions and to try to de-bureaucratize some of the decision-making. So I hope that happens in the IT sector. But I would just end by commending all three of you to the notion that we can't continue to let the Pentagon insist. It's unique. Everything there is sui generis, and it should not be subject to these bothersome, nettlesome procedures and accounting processes and the like. The accounting of a dollar is the accounting of a dollar, whether it's for defense or whether it's for some other commodity or service. And the Pentagon can benefit from the efficiencies we're talking about here with the Data Act and other measures, and in fact needs to. In a time of tight resources, it's incumbent upon agencies like the Pentagon to identify the efficiencies we're talking about, the savings we're talking about, to stretch the dollars they do get appropriated. And so I hope your work will extend to the Pentagon, because I think they can really benefit from it, and that's where the dollars are. If we exempt them or give them a pass, then a lot of our good work is not as widespread as it could be and will not have the maximum benefit that was intended, I think, here and by y'all's good effort. So I commend that thought to you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say thank you to Gene here at the last hearing of the year at his topic. It always makes me feel better about where we're headed and where we might be able to find some common ground to making a difference. I was with some of my freshman colleagues who were here getting involved, and they were asking, why can't we just implement the GAO duplication report? Why can't we just start there? Isn't that going to be the common ground that brings folks together? I just want you to know how much your work means to us, not just us who are here, but those new folks who will be coming in January. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to you.
I thank you. Mr. Dodaro, I want to echo Mr. Woodall's comments. I don't think I heard you remind us that for every dollar we invest in GAO, we get about a $100 return.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. Last year, implementation of our recommendations resulted in over $54 billion in financial benefits to the government, and it's been fairly consistent over the years. So I appreciate the recognition, Congressman Wu.
And how large is your budget?
Our budget is about, for this past year, about $500 million.
So a 10% increase, $50 million, would give us about a $5 billion return, right?
We would sure strive to make that happen.
Okay, I just want to figure out how we can shave $5 billion from the budget. It sounds like it's a simple $50 million ledge branch appropriations. I want to close.
Mr. Chairman, could I just?
The gentlelady.
This has been such a good and hopeful and encouraging hearing. I just want to caution us all to keep the usual skepticism of this committee. Remember what a trial it was to get the Affordable Health Care Act across the country online, because nobody had ever done it before. The Federal government did it quite badly at first, and then did it much better.
Thank God FATARA is being signed by the President as we speak, practically. It's going to take care of that.
Well, but think about this. Now we're asking every agency in the Federal government to go on the same line. If ever we should have a note of caution, even skepticism, as the note we sound as we close this hearing, surely seeing what it took to get one agency to go online, and then in the states, just one agency to go online, should caution us to do this very slowly with pilots in the agency first, because we're asking the entire Federal government to do what we have already seen. Even one agency, a very large agency among those that will have to do this, found it very difficult to do. Then to get it all lined up so that it all works smoothly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady. To that point, Mr. Dodaro, is the Data Act truly new, or are we simply saying, this time we really mean it? And I say that because for decades, haven't we told agencies they are to find interoperable systems, they're to make their reporting consistent with best practices, they're to provide, eliminate redundancy, and in fact, they're to replace outdated programs, some of them running on COBOL and older systems. So in a sense, isn't the Data Act simply a roadmap to a transition that has been ordered by people who predate my 14 years in Congress?
Yes, definitely. I think, and I've said this here and in the Senate testifying on this, without the proper legislative underpinning and consistent oversight, this won't happen. And I agree with the skepticism Ms. Norton is saying. But you're right in the sense that this provides the absolute requirements in law that people have to follow. And there have been many attempts in the past to try to achieve some of these aspirations. There's unique aspects of the Data Act in terms of machine-readable data and other things that are very important. So I don't want to say everything in there has been tried before. There are new features, but many of the fundamentals of it, of accurate reporting, complete reporting, and standardized reporting have been tried before with not very good effect. So I'm hopeful this time we'll get it right. And with the legislation, I commend this committee again. I think there's higher prospects that we'll get it right this time in the government.
Well, Mr. Mader, I saw your head shaking once again, and I appreciate it when it does that. You've been in and out of government. You've seen it, and you are at the epicenter. OMB has been constantly saying to these agencies, you've got to give us stuff we can use. You've got to be accountable. Is this, in fact, saying here is the beginning, if you will, of a roadmap, and I know you're going to continue designing the details of that roadmap, a roadmap of how you will achieve minimum standards, not best practices, but minimum standards that allow you to manage the Federal Government better?
I think, Mr. Chairman, one of the things I learned in the private sector, and you mentioned it in your opening statement, is what, as a private sector company, what's expected. And you made a comment that I agree with.
If you can't measure it, it
doesn't get done. If you can't measure it, it doesn't get done. And I think this time with the legislation, with the oversight both of GAO, the IGs, and the Congress, and I think the commitment of both the Treasury and the OMB, we can be successful over time. As Ms. Norton said, I don't think we should minimize the level of effort that it's going to take across the complexity of this government to get people to agree on standards and then actually define the data against those standards and bring it all together. I think, as we've all testified, this is good for the executive branch, it's good for the legislative branch, and it's certainly good for the American public. It's just going to take us time and, keep focused. And my commitment to the committee and to you is in the 2+ years that I'm going to be here, this is one of my primary areas of focus.
Thank you. Mr. Lieber.
And I would agree with that. This is really very much of a high priority for me as well. And I think the reference that you made to pilots is really important in that, we do have agencies that are at different phases along the way. And for us to show success and show the value is going to lead others to want to get on board more quickly. I am very much an internal optimist around this, and I think that it's important for the leadership of a program like this to be very optimistic and sort of be out there and saying we need to be doing these things. But I'm also a realist and been in government long enough to know that this is tough stuff. And to have people think about something differently and approach it differently, in part because technology has helped us here. There's a different way to apply technology than we have in the past, but that's not something that every agency sees immediately and embraces immediately. So we're going to have to show successes. We're going to have to show people it can work, it does work, and I think that's going to lead to others saying, yes, this is something we very much want to embrace. Again, I think the good news is really we have not seen anyone, as Dave and I have gone up and spoke to them, who don't understand the importance of this and don't understand the potential value. They do see difficulties about how they're going to get from point A to point B, given the complexities of their systems, given funding issues that may be out there, some are more reticent on this than others.
Thank you, and I'm going to recognize the ranking member for a close, but I'll just say something from my private sector time. When you've got something that's hard to do, and as you say, you need buy-in, it has to belong to them, you also need a carrot. So I would hope that as you're developing the standards, and particularly I think OMB has this responsibility, you would embrace two things that I know you've dealt with in the private sector. First of all, if somebody doesn't say, here's best practices, then people will look at this as what is the minimum to get by. And Gene, I know you will be saying you didn't hit the minimum to most of the people who thought they hit the minimum, because if you shoot for the minimum, you'll come up short. If you shoot for the stars, you'll usually at least pass the minimum. And secondly, nowhere in this legislation does it actually call for, if you will, an award. But I would strongly suggest that as we implement this, as people are asked to deliver you rich metadata usable information, not just machine readable, but rich in how far it drills down, that in addition to the best practices you may develop, that some form of award would in fact allow people to compete annually for how do we give the American people and our IGs and the GAO and our own management team richer and more easily readable material. And I say that because I think there's two parts to it. There's the Federal workforce that so much wants to be seen as doing something that's worth being rewarded and awarded. But I also think that there are a number of well-known contractors who work side by side who very much think that those awards are how they go in and sell their software. And so I can see various names, and I won't mention any of them here, but we all know them. They're almost all large. They would be certainly active in wanting to make sure that their clients within government are the ones that win that award. And I think that gets a buy-in at a level of the Federal workforce and the contract community that I'm hoping with your leadership, that 2+ years you have left, or perhaps more, you'll be able to implement. And so I just ask you to consider that. Thank you. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to I thank all of you for being here today. Your testimony has been very helpful. Listening to all of it, I go back to something that I talk to my staff about constantly, and that is being effective and efficient. Two simple words, effective and efficient. The idea that we could not be counting and then having that information put out there, to me, is like basketball. I mean, this is basic stuff. You got to be able to pass and dribble to play ball. And this, to me, is basic, and I know it's difficult. I know it may be complicated, but I think if the American people knew the position that we've been in and the way we've been doing things, they'd be very upset, because they don't handle their budgets like that. Because they know that if they handle their budgets, and if they had such little information, it would be impossible to take care of their households. So I think we've come a long way, but the implementation is so important. And going back to the concerns of Ms. Norton, funding is significant, and I realize that there's going to be some issues there, and we can't kid ourselves about that. But I also want us to be frank with what we can get done and in the time that we can do it. I think the American people get frustrated sometimes when I said, like the example that I gave a little earlier when I was talking about Katrina. I think about that all the time, because I realize that we constantly say things are going to work, and then when they don't work, then the American people say, oh, God, my tax dollars are spent and they're not being spent properly. So I think it's so important that we make it work and make it work well. But, Mr. Dodaro, I go back to what I asked you before, this whole thing of information. I'm telling you, I don't the idea that the agencies are not providing the kind of information that needs to be provided in the way it needs provided and the time it needs to be provided, to me, that undercuts all of this. And it goes back to what I said about effectiveness and efficiency. So I think we now have the framework. I'm an optimist too. I really am. But at the same time, I think we have to make sure that we put every single thing in this process, or use every tool that we have to make it work, and look for the gaps. And that's the biggest gap, that information piece. Because that's what this is all about. And if we don't, then I think it goes against our effectiveness and efficiency. So, again, I want to thank you all very much. I want to go back to the usage example. I want, Mr. Dodaro, I'm looking forward to getting that information, because I think it's important that we have contractors who are doing it right. And I agree with the Chairman. I mean, it needs to be a balanced approach, but I want to make sure that we have the information so that we will know of those agencies, those companies that may be not always acting at the highest level of integrity when dealing with the United States government. That's important. And so I think we have to make sure that I don't know what this tool is. I want to see it. And I'm curious as to whether it addresses all of the issues with regard to subsidiaries. But I think it's so very, very important. And so I don't know how soon you're going to get me that information. How soon you think you can get that to us? I can't hear you, sir.
Next week. You have it by next week.
Oh, very well, very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to thank all of you for your valuable insight. I will additionally thank all of you, particularly OMB and Treasury,